Welcome to African Roots, brought to you by DW. In this podcast series, we discover how individuals from across Africa shaped the continent. I'm Cai Nebe.
And I'm Laila Johnson-Salami.
Today, we're talking about the evolution and understanding of humans. Laila, I have a really fun fact for you.
Well, Kai, I love a fun fact, so I'm all ears.
Yeah, so did you know that everyone in the world is sort of African?
I have heard this before, but how so?
Well, I'm glad I can tell you that part. Well, it's because the African continent is super old. And we also happen to have some of the oldest fossils in the world, Laila.
What, like a good proportion of our current presidents or what?
Well played. No, but seriously, we do have some of the world's oldest fossils, and probably one of the most famous ones in that regard is a fossil called Lucy.
Lucy?
Yeah, Lucy is also known in some quarters as Dinknesh. She's a 3.2 million year old hominoid skeleton, to be honest.
Wow, that is really old, Kai. Sorry to say this, but doesn't that predate human evolution?
Well, yeah, Lucy, or Dinknesh as she's known in Ethiopia, is the name of one of our most ancient ancestors. Well, to be perfectly straight, it's actually more the remains of her. See, archaeologists discovered her bones in 1974, and it was a real scientific sensation because at the time, Lucy was one of the oldest and most complete fossils of any early human species that had ever been found. And over the past 40 years, Lucy has helped reshape the history of humanity, really.
That's all, fine and well, Kai, but let's back up a second because you've still got me on Lucy. Why Lucy?
Well, that's a good question, and that actually draws inspiration from a song.
Look for the girl with the sun in her eyes and she's gone. Lucy in the sky with diamonds.
Wait. That's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles, no?
Yep, it is. So in 1974, this team of scientists led by a main scientist called Donald Johansen was scraping for fossils in northeastern Ethiopia's Rift Valley. And when they realized what they'd found and realized the impact of their discovery, the team, I guess, went absolutely wild and had a huge party in their camp. And apparently this was the song they played, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds by the Beatles. And just the name stuck because the fossil was always associated with the song then.
That explains it, kinda. So tell me a bit more about the discovery. What else do we know?
Yeah, so geographically speaking, this region of Ethiopia called the Hadar region is quite fascinating. It's home to the Afar Depression, there is volcanic activity, and it's also, the Afar Depression, by the way, is also one of the lowest points in Africa in terms of altitude. It's also the start of the Great Rift Valley, which runs all the way from East Africa to Mozambique. This place is where many super old hominid fossils have been found, and thanks in part to the research that was kickstarted by the discovery of Lucy.
That is pretty special, I must say. But it does also seem like ever since this discovery of Lucy, they found many other remains. So why is Lucy in particular so special?
So I also kind of wondered that. But I did manage to go and ask someone who knows a lot more about this than I do.
What makes Lucy unique is at the time of discovery, Lucy was the only human ancestor of that age which has about 40% of her body parts represented. Because all what we used to know in those days was just, a fragment of a jaw, a fragment of a, head, fragment of a leg.
That's Professor Behan Asfor, a renowned Ethiopian paleoanthropologist. It's a big word. Someone who studies early humans.
But Lucy had about 40% of its body preserved. So we were able to at least to know about her biology better than any of the fossils at that time. So because of that, Lucy took the limelight, the stage in human evolution for a long, long time.
But the excitement wasn't just because the team had found so many of Lucy's bones. They also found that, and this is really crucial, she walked differently compared to the other specimens that had been found that were kind of around that age.
And significantly, she was a specimen that had not only remains of the head and the teeth, which are very important for telling us about the diet and brain size of this creature, but also associated parts of the skeleton, importantly, parts of the skeleton that showed that she walked on two legs.
So that's Dr. Robert Blumenschein, the chief scientist of South Africa's Paleontological Scientific Trust, pointing out the thing that really was important there, bipedalism.
This is really interesting, Kai. I mean, are we saying that Lucy was a modern human like you and I? I mean, she walked differently. How do we place her?
Well, she certainly walked like a human, but she also shares many features with apes.
So that's pretty much like a perfect depiction of evolution.
Yeah, so for example, her arms are curved and longer than her legs. That's different to us humans, obviously, suggesting that she spent more time climbing trees than maybe on the ground. She's much shorter than the average person. Her nose is flat, for instance, and she has a protruding lower jaw like a chimpanzee's. But Laila, I think the biggest wow factor about Lucy, along with many of the other discoveries of early human skeletons in Africa, is this point that Blumenschein makes.
All of the characteristics that distinguish us from our closest living relatives, the chimpanzees, originated on this continent, from bipedalism to dependence upon technology, and also to the quintessential of human traits, those associated with our large brains, our intelligence, our ability for abstract thinking and symbolic behavior. These are all African innovations, making everyone in the world African to the core.
Yeah, in a nutshell, really, African to the core.
Yeah, it's a pretty good title, right?
Yep, it is. But Kai, let me just come back to the name for a second, Lucy, because you did also say that she's known as Dinknesh in Ethiopia. So let's get into why there are two names here.
Yeah, so you see, since her discovery, Lucy has also been claimed by many Ethiopians. You see, the region where she was discovered, Ethiopia, was an independent African country, and many Ethiopians really took ownership and saw Lucy as theirs, and they called her Dinknesh, which is a local term meaning you are marvelous.
Oh, that's a beautiful name. And can anyone see her?
Not unless you have tickets to Ethiopia. The original skeleton is under lock and key in Ethiopia's National Museum in Addis Ababa. And Lucy or Dinknesh only appears for special exhibitions. But there are plaster replicas on display around the world, and there are complete scans of her skeleton and her bones online.
Well, Kai, what do you say? I feel like we have something to add to our bucket list.
Yeah.
Anyway, when we come back, humans' quest to find out more about themselves and those around throws light on a very dark chapter.
DW African Roots. Find new African Roots episodes on dw.com/African Roots, Spotify, iTunes, and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is African Roots. I'm Cai Nebe.
And I'm Laila Johnson-Salami. Kai, that story of Lucy or Dinknesh is remarkable in terms of its scientific importance and, also the meaning that it brings for Ethiopians. But not to put a downer on things, do forgive me. I am afraid that the story I'm going to tell you has no feel-good factor, at all. But it does hold important lessons on how people treat those that they see differently from themselves. And this story is about Sarah Baartman, a woman who lived in South Africa 2 centuries ago.
Okay, so this is going back a few hundred years.
Yeah. And, this was at a time in South Africa's history where Britain had control over the Cape, but not much else. And Sarah Baartman was born in the equivalent of the Wild West, let's say, sort of a contested area between the local people and the British colonists of what is now the Gamtus River in the Eastern Cape. Sarah Baartman was a Khoi woman. She arrived in Cape Town in the late 1790s or early 1800s, and this was to pick up domestic work, so washing clothes and other menial jobs.
Oh, okay, so was Sarah a free person or was she a slave?
Good question. Well, records that we have show that she was free, but Sarah Baartman always drew attention, especially from the Europeans in the Cape.
And why was that?
Well, see, Sarah Baartman had large fat accumulations in her buttocks and thighs, a genetic trait found in her people, the Khoi, who lived in the Cape and coastal areas of South Africa for centuries. Now, a Scottish doctor that was based in the Cape, he was known as Alexander Dunlop, conspired with Sarah's employer to allow him to take her to London. Cai, he basically claimed that Sarah would be an attraction and make money. Do you see where I'm going here?
Well, wait. So at this stage, there wasn't slavery, but there were like kind of freak shows and circuses. Is that what you mean?
Believe it or not, yeah. And in those days, people were exhibited for money at these freak shows. So especially in places like London, where so-called, in quotes, unusual people, as they would say, from colonies, were often brought. Now, Sarah Baartman arrived in London in 1810 with her employer, Alexander Dunlop. And I must say, records don't really clarify whether she made the journey willingly or if she was forced.
But that's a horrible experience to go through. But then did these shows pan out or what happened?
Well, for several years, Sarah Baartman was paraded in European shows, Cai literally like a wild animal. She had a big behind, right? So crowds flocked to see her large buttocks, earning her patrons a fortune. For this, she was made to wear skin-tight clothing as well, and feathers, stuff like that. And sometimes she would attend private shows where these guests could touch her. Now, the worst part is Sarah Baartman was not seen as human. And this is the part that really gets me, because she was seen as the missing link between humans and apes. And this is how her shows were sometimes marketed. Oh, and by the way, before I forget, she wasn't called Sarah at that time. She was called, by them at least, Hottentot Venus.
Okay, and what does that mean?
Well, here we go. Now, Hottentot was a white name for the Khoi people of South Africa. Nowadays, it's a very offensive term, okay? And Venus alludes to the Roman goddess of love. But mostly, Cai, Europeans just didn't treat her with any love whatsoever. Many regarded Sarah Baartman as a monstrosity and not much better than an animal. Here's Fundi Nzimande, a South African gender activist and former commissioner for gender equality.
It comes mostly from the belief that Africa is a dark continent, and the belief that whoever lived here was subhuman. So those beliefs informed how they dealt with the African inhabitants that they found here, the Khoi people and the San people. The relationships were terrible, and in pre-colonial times, women were not seen generally as decision makers. And it was therefore easy for them to be exploited.
Oh, that's terrifying. That's really horrible.
Yeah, like Nzimande said, there was that belief that people on the African continent were subhuman. And the exploitation, sorry to say, gets worse. 5 years after her arrival in Europe and after many tours, Sarah died in poverty in Paris, where she also had shows. Now, we don't really know what kind of a life she lived, though some accounts talked of a depressed existence, alcoholism, and servitude. Now, To shock you even further, Sarah Baartman was only about 25 years old, and by this stage, Sarah could speak 4 languages and had seen more of the world than most people then. But no matter her accomplishments, she was still treated like some exotic animal, and all of this at the age of 25. It touches me because that's my age now, you know?
God, it's a really horrible story. And also, I mean, just to think of that exploitation and that there was no one to sort of say that this is wrong. I mean, it is unbelievable looking back in it now.
Yeah, but you know, it does get darker. Because of her unique body, Sarah, or what they called unique, rather, let's say, Sarah was dissected by Georges Culver, a scientist, and he described her features as ape-like. Now, for 160 years, take that in, 160 years, people could literally gape at her skeleton, her brain, and her genitalia at an anthropology museum in Paris. And this is perhaps the most shocking part, because those remains from Sarah Baartman were only removed from public display in 1974 after protest.
1974?
Yes.
That's like in the lifetime of our parents.
Literally. And that's the thing, you know, for many South Africans, Sarah Baartman might have died 200 years ago, but her fate is still significant. Cai, let's listen in again. Here's Fundi Nzimande again.
She's seen as a symbol of the extreme and horrific violences that people have suffered in situations where they were made powerless, where they were dispossessed. So she's a symbol of the worst atrocities that human beings have ever gone through.
Okay, but Laila, this is obviously a very, very horrible story and stuff. But is this a well-known story, or how did it emerge?
Good question. You know, well, after apartheid in South Africa ended in 1994, her story certainly saw a revival. Under Nelson Mandela, South Africa started to fight for the repatriation of her remains. But, Cai, it took until 2002. It literally took until 2002 for her body to return home.
Wow. Okay, but that did happen, right? She is buried in South Africa now.
Yes. Sarah Baartman was finally laid to rest. Her burial in her home province of Eastern Cape did put an end to nearly 2 centuries spent abroad. It's sad. Fundi Nzimande, who I spoke to earlier, says a thing like this, and we can all agree with her, should never be repeated.
We are saying never again should any human being have to be treated in that particular way. And it's teaching us that we should honor all people and treat them with decency, regardless of what their gender is, regardless of what their color is.
I think, Laila, the thing that really does get to me throughout this story that you've told is it's just this dehumanizing aspect of it that no matter, it's just really hard to believe that so many people could willingly go along with that for so long.
Yeah, and, I find it hard to believe too, but I think the worst part, perhaps, is that, we look at the objectification of Sarah's body with so much rage and disgust, right? But in a way, these are forms of discrimination that are still happening today. And I'll give you an example. Look at how, for example, people react, to tennis champion Serena Williams in this day and age. Despite being one of the most successful athletes of all time, people shockingly, they ridicule her body. And which, side note, by the way, I think looks great. But these are things that, in a way, are just still happening today.
You would think that we would have come on from that. And I guess I see your point in that there are parallels to how that is still happening, perhaps not on as big a scale or such an obvious scale as that with Sarah Baartman. Even, I guess, if we've made some progress, I think there's still a long way to go.
Yeah.
That's where we will have to leave things for today. African Roots is a cooperation between Deutsche Welle and the Gerda Henkel Foundation. Special thanks to our producers Jürgen Kuhn, Philip Zantner, and our voiceover artists. Contributions by Jane Ayeko Kumet, Tusa Kamalo, Mante Seleshi, Johannes Gebre Egzeabe. I'm Kai Nebe.
And I'm Laila Johnson-Salami.
Join us again next time. Bye for now.
Bye.